Our partners in the US are already worried that we're going to lose the market, and they see 150 easily, probably more like 200. The whole idea behind this business is simply based on the assumption that, over the years, Bitcoin will outperform every other asset. And now we're already getting the first memes again. Yeah, investing in Bitcoin at 200. So we want to pick up speed, but there are just some regulations we have to stick to. Yesterday, there was a discussion about an underground parking garage. Or, when you buy a house, you actually end up losing money. So, it's better to just have everything in Bitcoin. You have to go where the energy is, that's where you go, and then we just get started.
Hi everyone, I'm Mark, and here with me is Andreas Wegerich, inventor of the well-known mole meme and CEO of the first Bitcoin treasury company in Germany. So, hi Andreas, how are things going and what's the plan?
Markheim, yeah, my followers. They're always begging and complaining. I knew it, that was new, yeah. They provoke me like that. Yeah, say something and so on. Then I just did it for them. And now it's become something. I like it.
So that means Nikki wants to become the first Bitcoin treasury company in Germany. And what's the plan? Why a Bitcoin treasury in Germany? There was already a video about this before, but there have been quite a few updates since then. Maybe you could catch us up?
Yeah, it's actually pretty simple. In the meantime, with a team of seniors and juniors, we've analyzed about 100 companies in the US. That means we know the playbook pretty well. There are Bitcoin treasuries that are doing it right.
Analyzed worldwide.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you mentioned the US.
Yeah, but mainly they're in the US. But we've also got some in Japan and in Europe. So yeah, we know which playbook works and we also know which playbook doesn't work. And now, with Nikki, it's about raising money, which means structuring capital market transactions. And I've been in the capital markets for over 25 years, and I've accompanied many bond transactions, convertibles, debt securities, capital increases, IPOs, and now we're doing it for ourselves, structuring capital market transactions, and the money goes into Bitcoin.
Exactly. Then you just hold the Bitcoin, don't sell, and that's the loop. Can you?
Maybe briefly.
Yeah, exactly. I can. So, could you maybe briefly explain the difference? Because I think a lot of people don't realize that as capital, or on the capital market, or as a publicly listed company, you have advantages over a private investor. Because a private investor might say, okay, can't I just buy Bitcoin myself with leverage or something, like a margin loan or something like that? Why is the stock vehicle preferable when it comes to raising capital on the financial market?
Yes, the first advantage is simply that we are listed on a regulated market. So we are EU regulated. That's already a difference compared to over-the-counter trading. In Germany, we have about 2,000 companies that are listed on the stock exchange, but only around 400 are on the regulated market, which means we are also an institutional stock. And yes, we know the institutional investors and the semi-institutional investors. And now we can create products. So, it's always also a commodity. A stock is a commodity. That's how the professionals see it. A bond is a commodity. A convertible bond is a commodity. And our job today is to structure the commodity in such a way that the asset manager, the family office, or the fund manager finds the commodity attractive, considers it tradable, and is willing to invest.
Exactly. So overall, we have 100 trillion in institutional capital potential, and out of that 100 trillion in institutional capital, 97% is mandated to invest in Bitcoin through a security. Because many private investors say, all Bitcoin and self-custody, I agree. But many people just can't hold Bitcoin themselves, and that's exactly what Nikki wants to address. That means simply creating the pipeline for people who currently have no access to Bitcoin and enabling them to gain that access.
So, what we're seeing now on the roadshow with asset managers is that, like me, a lot of them are older white men, and we definitely have to do a bit of education, some training. Yeah, at the end of the day, it's like this. Today, at Nikki, we hardly have any authorized or conditional capital left. We would need conditional capital for Kano.
Can you explain that once? Conditionally authorized.
The capital is authorized, and shares are created from it. That means we can do capital increases at Nikki, print shares, and issue them. We get money for that, which is then reinvested in Bitcoin. And that's also the difference compared to private individuals. A private person could take out a loan, but then they're obligated to repay it. We, on the other hand, can issue shares from authorized capital. The conditional capital is for mezzanine, or that intermediate level between equity, mezzanine, and debt capital. That means it's a hybrid, and that's what it's used for. So we can issue a bond that can later be converted into shares, and that's what the conditional capital is needed for. But first, we need the general meeting, which will be at the end of November, to get enough capital released by our shareholders. Until then, we have no way to raise millions except through a straight bond, and that's exactly what we're working on right now.
That was exactly my question, because the most frequently asked question is, okay, you want to be a Bitcoin treasury company, but you don't actually have any Bitcoin, so when are the first purchases coming? But you just explained that, of course, you need to get as much fiat as quickly as possible, but your hands are tied because there are simply regulatory hurdles, and you can't just have private investors hit the buy button.
So today, it's also about where exactly will it be stored. We've now decided on a German custodian that is institutionally recognized. And sure, we could temporarily park some funds from our working capital or buy some Bitcoin. But we don't want to make small trades or just buy a little bit here and there. We want to do this properly. So we're allocating a few million for this purpose. And that's what the bond is for. After that, we'll immediately have the general meeting. And then in February or March, we'll be able to transfer significantly more millions from the conditional capital and the authorized capital into Bitcoin. And that's why things are a bit tied up right now.
There was an announcement about U.S. market expansion. What's that all about?
Well, in the U.S., Wall Street, of course, is the biggest capital market in the world. And in a way, the whole world dances to Wall Street's tune. So if something happens this afternoon and the DAX makes a decision and moves in a certain direction, in the end, all the traders are still waiting to see what happens in the US. And if something happens in the morning and you see it in the Nikkei or the Hang Seng or in Singapore, then at some point, even if it's a huge exchange, the volume drops off and everyone waits for New York to open. And we also expect that, especially on the Nasdaq, companies are valued much higher on average, with much higher price-earnings ratios than here in Germany. Germany is a very conservative market, and when it comes to the US, we've also thought about the Nasdaq, but that's expensive. Listing on the Nasdaq starts at over $1 million or $2 million, and you have to pay that every year. Of course, we want to keep our operating costs low. 2 days ago, I had a meeting about the over-the-counter market in the US, which is called the OTC board. OTC stands for over-the-counter. But now, if you have a brokerage account on your phone in the US and you trade from your phone, you can't tell the difference. You can't see whether we're listed on Wall Street or on the over-the-counter market. We're expecting to gain a bit of traction from that.
What would you say to people who claim that you can't do something like this in Germany, that it's too complicated in Germany? Yeah.
It was always like that. They told me back then that we couldn't create a high-yield market, and a year later, there were 10 banks there, and 2 years later, we had 50 competitors. Go first is always the rule. You have to go where the energy is, and then the others will follow.
And that means, now the thing is, we've already talked about this, a lot of people still have a really hard time with Bitcoin, especially institutional investors. What would you say are the main sticking points there?
So gold is understood. That's simply because gold is seen as an investment, even though, unlike a stock or a company, gold doesn't generate any cash flow. You don't have any metrics like price-earnings ratio or revenue profit. You don't have any management like you do in companies. With corporations, asset managers can rely on the management. They can rely on key metrics. We don't have that with gold, but gold is accepted because it's been known as a store of value and a means of payment for thousands of years. And that's why gold is recognized. How old is Bitcoin now? 16 years old. It's supposed to be the digital gold, supposed to be a store of value. And of course, some people, myself included in the past, some asset managers have a hard time with that because they're missing the usual standards. If someone invests in a company, they can talk to the manager, then they have junior analysts. They give them the financial statements. Then everything gets screened, and then they can make a decision. Here, it's different. And for the market, especially in conservative Germany, to recognize Bitcoin as an asset, as a store of value, there's still a bit of work to be done. But I experienced it again yesterday. I'm actually doing pretty well with it.
That means it's basically about tapping into big capital now. Florian, can you quickly hit stop and then play for a moment? So, what's your general outlook on Bitcoin at the moment? We've now seen interest rate cuts in the US, and there are all kinds of different forecasts about that. You don't have to make a prediction right now, but the reason for the Bitcoin Treasury Company is that you're bullish on Bitcoin and maybe bearish on the FT position. That means the two plays are being pitted against each other. So on one side, you're basically long on Bitcoin, and on the other side, you're basically short on ALS.
Right now, we have
SH.
Right now, we're afraid the market is going to run away from us. I was on the phone with New York again last night, and the guys we're buying from. I mean, these are top STKs. The managers are all former hedge fund managers. They know everyone there. So we didn't just buy some random company. We got something real. And now they're all saying we need to move faster. But what am I supposed to do? We've got Oktoberfest. And Munich is a major financial center. After Oktoberfest, we're heading out to meet the fund managers in Munich. Then we're off to Augsburg. Then on to Frankfurt. Then we'll have another meeting in Düsseldorf. And then the roadshow is done. After that, we'll raise the money for the bond and then we can invest. But our partners in the US are already worried that the market will slip away from us. And they see, what did he say yesterday? You were driving 150 easy.
That was 200.
150 easy. Probably more like 200. And then we're already getting the first memes, like, yeah, Bitcoin Treasury invested at 200. I mean, we want to pick up the pace, but there are just some processes we have to stick to. So we're thinking 150, 200, yeah, that's where we're at.
Yeah, so speed really is a bit of an issue. But on the other hand, this is also a long-term strategy. We're not just in it for a year. The idea is that Bitcoin will keep rising in the long run. And even if, let's say, by the end of the year Bitcoin is where it is now, in the long term, Bitcoin could potentially reach 1 million or something like that. So you really can't forget about that long-term thinking.
The whole idea behind this business is simply based on the assumption that, over the years, Bitcoin will outperform every other asset. Of course, with volatility, which, by the way, I actually think is a good thing, that you seem to be aware of this big volatility. We have volatility, meaning price swings. Nevertheless, in the long run, it doesn't matter, because if we assume that Bitcoin always performs in the long term, despite the volatility, then it doesn't matter. Still, if we invest the first 5, 6, 7 million in Bitcoin and we just happen to buy at the peak, and then it goes down for 3 or 4 months before making the next move up, then, especially in a conservative environment, and Germany really is very conservative, like do something safe, kid, then we end up looking pretty dumb. So, it would definitely be better if we could catch a move where we get in at a good price and then it takes off. That would, of course, be easier to explain.
Yeah, exactly. But that's not the idea, to try to time the market. I mean, we can't influence the price, but maybe you can say a thing or two about that, since we're a treasury company. Bitcoin, the herd rate. Many people don't understand that Bitcoin is the benchmark. People, for example, look at their S and AMP wink with tongue sticking out 500 and made 12%, and they think that's cool. But the Bitcoiner thinks 30 or 40%, and S and AMP wink with tongue sticking out 500, I lose money. Real estate, I lose money. Stocks, I lose money.
Even though he made money, he loses money if he's diversified. So, the professional has to diversify. He can't put everything into one asset, even if he says that's the asset.
You mean asset managers now, or?
Yeah, he has to diversify. That's also in his statutes. So it's not quite that easy. I think private investors are allowed to diversify, yes. You don't have to put everything on one card, even if you think that's the best card. Diversification isn't so bad. Yesterday we had the discussion about a parking garage, or if you buy a house, then you actually lose money. So, you should rather have everything completely in Bitcoin. I think a little diversification is okay. Although as a company, we don't do it either.
Yeah.
All in.
Yeah, very cool, Andreas. So, we're heading to the roadshow now. Maybe you can say a thing or two about it. Most people have no idea what an RO is, what that even means, or what we're actually doing there.
Yeah, what we mean is a show. So, roadshow means you go out on the road, right? Roadshow is a fixed term. Especially in banking, it's a well-established concept. The way it works is that you visit cities where interested parties like funds, asset managers, and family offices are based, and you set up roundtables there. You really go to Munich, for example, have some roast pork, drink a light beer, and at the table, you have asset managers, family office managers, as well as journalists and analysts. Then you present what we do and make an offer, like the product will be available in 2 weeks, and so on. Then you have a tea. Maybe there was a white sausage breakfast where 5 people are there. At lunch, there might be 15 to 20. Then you have a tea, and now you can even do some of it virtually. That's actually the only positive thing that came out of COVID. Before, we really had to go to Zurich, Vienna, Munich, London, even New York, and you'd be gone for 2 or 3 days. Now you can do it virtually with Microsoft Teams or Zoom. And that's how this roadshow will be. We have lunch, then it's back to the hotel room. Then there are 2 Zoom meetings. Then you meet someone who has a lot going on and wants a one-on-one. So we meet him in the lobby. Then it's off to Augsburg in the evening, and so on. That's what a roadshow is.
All right, very cool. Thanks a lot. I'd say go ahead and sound off. Let us know in the comments below. Do you think it's a good idea to have a treasury company in Germany, or do you see it more critically? Maybe you're all about Bitcoin self-custody. Just tell us openly how you see it, and you'll get A.
Mouth off again, the critical mouth.
All right, folks. See you next time.